We have a text animation we're happy with, and now we'd like to render it. If you recall, I have two layers in this animation. I have the text layer, and I have a background movie with the penguins. If I was to render this as a composite, I only need to render the RGB channels. I wouldn't need an alpha channel because the movie is filling the entire frame. However, let's say your client isn't sure what the background movie should be, so they've asked you only to render the animated title. In order for them to composite this animation on another background, I need to render an alpha channel. I'll turn on the transparency grid so you can see exactly what's transparent and also see that this title has a nice black drop shadow. I'll want to make sure that this shadow is composited smoothly on whatever background they add in the editing program. If you'd like to see what the alpha channel looks like, you can set the Show Channels to Alpha Channel, and you can even RAM preview it. Wherever the alpha channel is white, the text will be fully opaque. Where it's black, will be fully transparent, and the drop shadow is semi-transparent. So that all looks good. I'll return to the RGB channels. To render my composition, I can select Make Movie from the Composition menu, or use the shortcut Command M on Mac, Control M on Windows. When I do that, the render queue will open. It'll add the composition to the render queue, using whatever default templates are set for render settings and the output module. Because I have a preference set under Output Preferences, it automatically uses the name of the composition for the file name. If I click on the name of the file, I can decide where I'd like to save it. In this case, it's the last folder I used. I can change the default name to something more useful, such as Penguin Playhouse Title Alpha, and then I'll click Save. Now before I click on the Render button, I want to make sure I have my render settings and output modules set up correctly. The render setting default I'm using is Best Settings. The only problem I see is that the time span is set to work area only. Now that can be a little dangerous. If I had set the work area to preview only a small section of my comp, that's all that would be rendered. So I want to make sure I set this to length of composition. Even better, I should change the Best Settings template so that it always renders with the length of composition. The other settings are fine, but I did want to point out that if I was rendering the background movie, and remember I had separated the fields earlier in the Interpret Footage dialog, I would want to set the Field Render pop-up to Lower Field first. That way, both fields from the source movie would be output in the final movie. Since I'm not rendering the background, I do have a choice. In this case, I think I'd like to have a progressive movie, so I'll make sure Field Render is off. I'll click OK, and let's look at the output module. I'll click on the word lossless to open the output module settings. In this template, it's only saving the RGB channels, and the alpha channel is being pre-multiplied to give it a nice clean look. I'll cancel out of this dialog and point out that there is another option called Lossless with Alpha. Now when I open the output module settings, you can see the channels default to saving RGB plus alpha. The other option is to only save the alpha channel, and that can be useful in some cases. The only problem with this template is that the color channel is still pre-multiplied. For a professional editing system, the preferred format is actually straight. I'm probably going to use the straight unmatted alpha channel option more often than pre-multiplied. So I'm going to cancel and show you how to do this change permanently. Under the Edit menu, let's open Templates, Output Module. We'll select Lossless with Alpha, and remember the default is to pre-multiply the alpha channel. Since I might want to use this sometimes, I'll change this to pre-multiplied, and then I'll duplicate it, and I'll make a second version called Straight. And of course this version I have to edit. And I'll change it to Straight, Unmatted. And by the way, if you're not sure of the differences between straight and pre-multiplied, I covered these in detail at the end of the basic animation installment. So this template will use the Straight Unmatted option. So I'll click OK, and now that I've edited my templates, my pop-up will show two options for alpha, straight or pre-multiplied, and I'll want to pick the straight option. Now I could click the render button now, but I'll make one more change. I'm going to change the post-render action so that the finished movie will be imported automatically into the project. That way I won't have to open it in the Finder to check that everything rendered correctly. Click OK, And now I'll select the render button. And this will only take a second. It's a pretty simple animation. And there's the happy, happy, joy, joy sound. Now there's two ways to find my movie. I can either twirl down the output module and click on the file path, and that will open it in QuickTime Player in the Finder. But since I've asked it to automatically import, I can find it in the project panel. If I open it in CS5 by just double-clicking, it will open it in the footage panel with the alpha channel factored in. So the edges look nice and clean, and in particular the drop shadow is nice and soft. But look what happens if I open it in QuickTime Player. To do that, I'll press the Option key on Mac or Alt key on Windows when I double-click the movie. In QuickTime Player, that nice soft drop shadow is showing up as a hard, ugly black shadow. Well, that's because QuickTime Player is not factoring in the alpha channel. It's only showing me the RGB channels. So it's not factoring in the transparency for the shadow in the RGB channels. This is actually a good thing and nothing to be worried about. The only time this might be a problem is if you deliver a job and the client opens it in QuickTime Player. You may get a panicked phone call. Just tell them to import it into their editing program, use the alpha channel, and everything will look nice and clean. Of course, if you want to email a quick proof, be sure to render with a pre-multiplied alpha. That way they can view it on a website or in QuickTime Player and it will look good. So I hope that helps you understand how to render with an alpha channel. If you take a few minutes and edit the default templates for render settings and output modules, you'll find the next time you make a movie, it'll go a lot faster because you'll have all the templates available.